Hello and welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast, a podcast dedicated to your health and well-being, featuring interviews with experts about nutrition, physical health, mental health, and my 5-minute food facts series, which are short episodes where I discuss nutrition-related topics. I'm Amanda Hayes, your host. I'm a lawyer turned nutritionist, and I'm on a quest to learn as much as I possibly can about living a healthy, active, and fulfilling life, which I would call a vibrant life, hence the name of my podcast, and sharing what I learn with you on this podcast. The health and nutrition space can be a confusing one, where misinformation and information mingle, and untangling fact from fiction and identifying reliable, trustworthy sources of information is not always straightforward. My aim is to help you do that by speaking with knowledgeable guests who can explain their area of expertise in an accessible way and provide you with practical tips that you can use to improve your own well-being. Before I introduce today's guest, I'll quickly acknowledge that any information or advice provided in Vibrant Lives podcast is not intended to be used to treat or prevent medical conditions, and it's never a substitute for advice from your own health professionals. Today I'm presenting you with what I think is a fascinating episode. My guest is Harry Glorikian, a Boston-based business expert, healthcare entrepreneur and author. Harry is a general partner at a venture capital firm, Scientia Ventures, that funds innovative tech companies operating in the healthcare space that use artificial intelligence and big data to make diagnostic devices. Harry's recently published a book called The Future of You: How Artificial Intelligence Can Help You Get Healthier, Stress Less, and Live Longer. We'll be discussing those topics and the intersection between big data and artificial intelligence in healthcare, including how the future of healthcare will look and how these technological advances may impact you. I learnt a lot from Harry's book, and I'm really excited to share some of that knowledge with you today. Hi, Harry. Welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's such a pleasure. And Harry, I'd like to start the podcast with some quick-fire questions to get to know a little bit about you outside your work as a health technology expert. So, Harry, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in San Francisco for about half my life. So I was maybe 27. And then the rest of my life, I've been here in the Boston area.
Right. So you've moved across the country.
Across the country to two extremely beautiful places, but yes, across the country.
Yeah, I do love San Francisco. I've not been to Boston. I will one day. And Harry, your favorite form of exercise?
Weightlifting is probably my favorite. Although I realize like I need to get in a good, aerobic exercise like a run like I did today, but generally it's weightlifting.
Yeah, great. Your go-to meal for dinner?
I said to my wife and my son, I'm like, what is my go-to meal? And they were like looking at me puzzled because I'll eat like just about anything. But I would say it has to be some sort of, protein and vegetable for the most part. So chicken or beef of some sort, and then some sort of vegetable if I can work it in there. Yeah,
perfect. And what are you enjoying listening to at the moment? It could be audiobook, music, anything, podcast.
I every day I will ask Siri to play me something different. So it could be top pop, Latin, 70s, 80s, 90s, right? I try to mix it up so that I'm not always listening to the same stuff. And then actually it really helps with my kids are sort of multi-generational music. The other thing that I'll do is I will save all the articles and papers that I'm interested in reading to a app called Pocket. And then when I go for a walk, the app will read me the paper.
Oh, fantastic. So do you set parameters and it chooses the things that you're interested in?
You flip up you sort of flip it into the article that you're interested in the Pocket, and it holds those articles. And then you click read, and then it starts reading the articles one by one.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. My husband would love that. And Harry, your favourite holiday destination?
Easy, Barbados.
Oh, wow. Yes, never been there either, but it does look amazing. So, Harry, you clearly enjoy being involved with technology and innovation in the health space. You worked in biotechnology, which is combining big data and biology, and you were at Applied Biosystems during the time that the human genome was sequenced. So currently you're a partner in a VC firm called Scientia Ventures, where you fund tech companies with specific goals. So can you tell us in broad terms, what kind of things are you looking to fund at Scientia Ventures?
So we generally invest in early to mid-stage companies at the intersection of data and biology. For examples, it would be companies that target, say, computational biology or chemistry, or the digitization of medicine, or a new area that's called digital therapeutics. But we all try to look at something that's going to be a breakthrough at the cutting edge of life science and healthcare.
That sounds so interesting. And throughout this podcast, we'll be talking about what some of those cutting edge and breakthrough things are. And recently you've written a book, and it's called The Future You, How Artificial Intelligence Can Help You Get Healthier, Stress Less, and Live Longer. So who wouldn't want to know about that? And I have to admit, Harry, when your book was sent to me, I was a little hesitant to read it, not because I didn't think it would be interesting, but because technology and I are not always great friends, and I thought, I just don't know if I'm going to understand this book. But clearly you wrote it with people like me in mind, because you gave some really clear explanations. And in the end, I loved reading it, and it was really interesting. So I thought a good place to start for our listeners, who some may be like me and not know a lot about technology or AI. So let's start with the basics. And can you explain to us in sort of lay terms what is meant by AI or artificial intelligence?
So, there's probably as many definitions of AI now that are, as there are scientists working on it. But in general, it's a variety of techniques. So it's not one thing. It's sort of, think of it like you're carrying around a toolbox.
Yep.
For getting computers to process information similarly to the way a human might, right? So depending on, do I need a screwdriver for this particular application? Do I need a wrench, right? So there are different tools in the toolbox that would be used depending on what I'm trying to do. So some common examples, right? Personalized shopping, all these AI-powered assistants, Siri, I forget what Amazon's say, Alexa, these sorts of things.
Yep.
Fraud prevention, like when your credit card says, did you make that purchase, right? So there's a system out there looking at patterns, and it notices something out of the ordinary and says, no, that doesn't look right. Voice assistants.
Yep.
Personalized learning, autonomous cars, right? Those are all using different forms of artificial intelligence that Google searches. People are using it every day, and it's in the background. They just don't know it's there.
Yeah. I think the thing that stood out to me about it is, in sort of very basic terms, is that the computer is teaching itself. It's learning. Is that right? Or not really?
Again, I think it depends on what the application is, right? So, let's say in some sort of medical thing, you want it already taught.
Of course,
you don't want it right
making it up.
But in other situations, it may be pulling in more data and sort of modifying itself as it goes.
Yes. Okay.
But in general, there's a lot of things where it's pre-trained when it gets there, so that it functions significantly, appropriate when it's being used at that time.
Yeah, that's a much better explanation than mine. And now I have to ask a silly question, because the whole time I was reading this book, I was wondering, where does all the data come from that's used in the AI algorithms, and how does it get collected?
So I guess the answer to that would, again, it depends on the application. So, if it's an exercise app and sleep app, right? it's getting a lot of data from you and all the
Yes.
other people that are using it. And then it learns your pattern along with everybody else. And that's where it gets a lot of its data from, right?
Yes.
And then it's sort of parroting that data back to you based on, how they've set up their application.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something like radiology, where you're looking at an X-ray or a CT or something, that system has to be trained on images that are labeled, so the system can learn, like, this
Right.
is a tumor, this is a break in the, in a bone, this is a bleed in the brain, right? It's got to be trained so that when it sees it, it can then highlight it to the physician.
Right. So all the CT data, is that collected from hospitals across the US or?
There are companies out there that sort of have repositories of these,
Right.
because you don't want just the data, but you want what's called labeled data,
Mm-hmm.
or data that says, when you see this, this means this,
Right.
and this
Okay.
means that, right? So that the system can be able to distinguish that based on how a human has categorized it or diagnosed it.
Okay. Oh, that's so interesting. Because when I think of data collection, I think back to my very early days in a law firm where we had to go through every single document in this big dispute we were working on and label it manually. And then I think it was put into a system, but we had to tell the system what it was, what kind of document it was.
That is one of the biggest impediments sometimes in the space is, do you have the right data and is it labeled correctly? Because, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So the
Absolutely.
better the data that goes into the training set,
Mm-hmm.
the more optimal, hopefully, the outcome of what you're trying to do is.
Yeah. So humans are not redundant yet, is what I'm hearing. We still have to feed in the right data.
There are certain things where, it's funny because people always talk about AI and they expect something like Commander Data on Star Trek or something,
Yeah.
something like that, right? And what I say to them is, it really only needs to do this very narrow thing really well. And by the way, it doesn't get tired. It does it over and over again. It's,
Yeah.
it can be incredibly accurate and incredibly fast. Those are things that we do every day. So it is getting better at doing certain things. Now, what we've noticed in healthcare is an AI system plus a human there's a better outcome than one or the other by themselves.
Yes.
But in certain situations, these things are getting incredibly good.
Yeah. And you do explain that in your book. And one of the reasons is that an AI system can look at so much more data than a human can.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like it can look at every skin lesion
Yeah.
ever, which is not possible by, a human being, right? But you still need a doctor to sort of put that last blessing on it to be like, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. And explain it, obviously, to the patient. Talking about healthcare, certainly the area that you work in, and it seems like there's a really good synergy between AI and healthcare, and they complement each other really well. So why is that?
So AI is playing sort of a more prominent role in medicine and healthcare because of the advances of computing power, these learning algorithms, and then we're really starting to, we have large data sets sourced from medical records and wearable health monitors. I mean, if you go back not that far, when you walked into the doctor's office, it was, file cabinets full of file folders, right? We're beyond that now, right? Now everything is in the computer. The minute it's in the computer and you have it digitized, now you can suck it up and, feed it to one of these systems that then can use it, to do whatever it is that it's going to do.
Yeah. Now that makes perfect sense. It just reminds me, my father was a doctor, and when I was a young girl in the holidays, we'd go down to his offices or his rooms, and one of the jobs we would, my sister and I would do, we would go through the huge rooms full of files of patients, and anything older than, I think they were legally obliged to keep things for 7 years, and anything
Right.
older than 7 years we could get rid of. And it was just one of those jobs that no one wanted to do. So my sister and I got paid a meagre fee to wade through all those files. But obviously, doing it electronically is so much more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, and once it's electronic, you really, in some ways, you may not want to ever get rid of it.
Yeah, you probably don't need to, because there seems to be sort of an unlimited storage, whereas with physical files, you had to make way for new files all the time.
Right.
In the health space, you say that AI is going to utterly transform the healthcare system as we know it today. And in fact, you even go so far as to say that it's the fourth industrial revolution. So let's look at some specific examples of how the healthcare system will be transformed. I thought we could start with one that everyone understands, and that's the use of smartphones. So in the US, the wellness industry is absolutely enormous. I read somewhere it's worth, or maybe in your book, in fact, $4 trillion. And so many of us are familiar with apps you've already mentioned, like things that track our sleep or track our exercise. So what are some of the examples of things that might lie ahead in this space with the use of our smartphones and AI and health?
There are so many new areas that are emerging. I mean, and some that people may not even know, exist. Like, there's a little device, I'm holding that it's called Cardia,
Right.
and it's about as thin as a credit card,
Yeah.
thinner, about as thin as a credit card, smaller, and you put two fingers on each electrode, and it will do an ECG of your heart, and it'll look at 6 different parameters of your heart.
That's
right?
amazing.
I used to have to go to my physician, get hooked up with all these wires, Of course, when they pull off the electrodes, half the hair on my chest would like to get pulled off too. And now I can just do this and put it here. And then if I want to ship the results to my doctor, I can. If I want, I can have the AI system look at it and see if it sees anything abnormal.
That's
right?
amazing.
But there are all these technologies like, another one is, my blood pressure cuff.
Oh, yes.
Which is, maybe 10 years ago, if you really wanted to do this, right, you'd have to go to somebody that really knew how to use a blood pressure cuff and read it. I mean, I just push a button and it just does it.
That's amazing. Do you do that every day?
I do it probably once a week, just to see how things are going. Inevitably, I might have to do it 2 or 3 times because I'm like, all right, you need to calm down when you're doing this because the numbers are going to be too high.
That's right. Yeah.
But there are so many of these new technologies that are coming up. It could be, companies that are looking at your genome and say tailoring diets more towards that, or the microbiome is a big area that's growing over time. Of, were you on antibiotics a lot? It could have disrupted your microbiome, and so getting it back to health is sort of difficult. But there are companies that are trying to do these sorts of things and use these technologies because there's so much data.
Yes.
That a human being trying to make sense of all this is, I mean, at some point you're like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
The computer can look at more parameters than you and I can.
And the other thing is that the computer's not biased. A human, or is that not? That's. Have I opened a can of worms?
No. It's. I want to say yes, it's not, but that would be like a false. That is somewhat a false statement today because some of these systems, depending on how they're trained, can have bias because of the data set that they used.
That makes sense.
What if I only trained it on males and not females? Right. So then, that's just an example. So, but what we're learning is that if you're going to get these technologies approved through some sort of regulatory body, they're going to scrutinize the data. They're going to see what the outcome is and so on and so forth. you want that for some of these products so that it's held to the highest standard, so that when it comes out, like I interviewed somebody on my podcast yesterday for a video game that is FDA approved, that is prescribed for children that have ADHD.
Oh, right.
So instead of taking a drug and having a side effect, they would play a video game and you would get an equivalent outcome of them taking a drug, and they would be able to focus more when they're at school or whatever. But that had to be held up to, a very high standard, like a drug would, so that, you get the outcome you want and it doesn't do something that you don't want.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, what an excellent example of the application of AI, I think.
Oh, yeah, there's some fascinating ones. Sometimes I talk to people out there and I'm like, oh my God, I really need to read more. And I read a lot. So there's a lot of really good stuff happening out there.
One of the examples in your book that I really loved was the smart bed. Can you tell us about what a smart bed would do?
Oh, yeah, that's my bed. My wife every once in a while might say it's a dumb bed because she doesn't interact with it the way that it wants it to interact with. But it's my bed it's a company called 8 Sleep, so the number 8. And what it does is it adjusts the temperature based on my level of sleep, so light sleep versus deep sleep versus in the morning, and it adjusts it according to the temperature that's in the room and outside. So in the wintertime, it's wonderful because I get into it and it's nice and warm.
Oh, lovely.
So you can fall asleep very quickly. And then as I go into deep sleep, it cools itself off because the cooler bed keeps you in deep sleep longer. Whereas in the morning, it warms up. Now, in the summertime, it will cool off. And so I don't have to use the air conditioner as much. And so I'm not tossing and turning because I'm hot. It keeps me cooler. So I sleep better.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, there's so much that can be done in this space, isn't there? And one thing I wondered with this kind of technology is it going to exacerbate any inequalities in healthcare? I mean, is this kind of technology expensive? Is it the kind of thing that the worried well will invest in as opposed to people who might need it? What's your thought on that? So
if we look at technology as a category and say, where has it gone from a price point? What you've seen over time is the impact of technology is actually deflationary. You get more from that technology every year for the same price or less. And so, do you carry around a scanner or a camera or, there's a million things that are in your phone now.
Yeah.
And it's a multifunctional device, right? Depending on the app. And what I'm seeing is technologies that would have been like this ECG I was holding up. This is $80.
Wow. That's incredible. Is that available on the market now? Or have you just got a
$80,
prototype?
No. This has been available for quite some time.
Right.
So, that's $80. I think the least expensive Fitbit these days might be $60 or $80. I mean, you do see that, it's coming down. I remember the first time I bought a wireless scale, it was probably closer to $200. I think you can buy a wireless scale now if you go to the local drugstore for like $30, $40. So, these things are they're coming down and they're becoming very accessible.
Yeah, because one of the points you make is it's democratizing medicine.
Oh, yeah. Sense. I mean, where many of these devices, I would have absolutely had to go into a hospital before. There's no other choice. They're at home now.
And in fact, that leads me very well to my next question. There's a great example in your book about decentralised healthcare. And you give an example where the kids are playing soccer, one collides with another and falls over and he hurts his arm. So in that situation, a parent would think, oh, is my kid's arm broken? He's in pain. Let's take him to the ER, where you might sit for hours to get an x-ray and see a doctor. So can you paint for us a picture of an alternative health outcome in that, or health treatment protocol, in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think, I can speak to sort of what's happening around here, around me, is clinics are like a CVS or a Walgreens or a Walmart will have clinics in-house where you can go and start to take care of these sorts of things much faster than you would, say, having to go to an emergency room.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other things that, that's happening is portable devices to sort of let you manage or take control of that health condition are becoming more readily available. Portable X-ray machines are becoming more of a reality. There's actually a portable CT scan that will hook up to your phone.
Wow.
And it will let you, the AI system will say, move a little down, move a little to the left, move up, move to the right. And when you're done, that image will be equivalent to a trained professional.
That's amazing. Oh my goodness.
Right? So these technologies are making it much more accessible to not necessarily have to go into the ivory tower for that particular service. Or in reality, I think it's going to bring the ivory tower out more into the community, making it more accessible for people to, make that decision or help you make that decision. I mean, there are systems now where if you had a lesion on your arm, you take a photo of it in the app, and it will tell you dermatologically, like, what are the percentages of that mole being a problem. And then you can make your appointment online, right? And so the whole process just gets moved along much easier and much more smoother than what we have today.
Yeah, it's a lot more efficient from the sounds of it. So with the boy who's gone to Walmart or wherever to have his portable x-ray and it turns out, it's not broken, that means then that's one less person going into the ER department.
Oh, absolutely. I know that during COVID, we were having unbelievable problems here. I think that some of that may have been alleviated at this time, but technology is changing the business model. Before, you had no choice but to go to this location because all the technology and knowledge was there.
Yeah.
Now that that technology is sort of becoming more readily available, you can do that at a clinic. You can do some of it at home. You can do monitoring at home now with telehealth. It's changing the dynamics of the model as it exists.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? I mean, it takes the pressure off the hospital system and it also empowers the patient as well to make their own informed decisions. One of the really interesting things about AI is AI in terms of its interaction with the human genome. And an example of genetics and cancer treatment that most people have heard of is the test for the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes that are linked to breast cancer. In your book, you talk about cancer tumours can have their own genetic testing. And so I was wondering if you could explain how this works and how this knowledge can assist us with cancer treatment.
Think of it like Google Maps. To put it into the simplest terms is, if you know your destination, right, this gives you a map to sort of get there much more efficiently. The existing process of some of the treatments is trial and error. For to put it into the simplest terms, I mean, we could go into detail on this, but if I sequence the tumor there may be personality traits, genomic signatures that are then susceptible to certain therapies that would actually work on that tumor, right? Better than, we're going to give you this drug first. If that doesn't work, we're going to give you this drug. If that, we're going to move down the line, right? By the time you're at the third or fourth line of treatment, you're not happy. You're not a happy camper.
And
right?
You've wasted
Whereas
time.
if I was able to find something that I can send a targeted missile towards, my chances of affecting that tumor significantly grow. Right. And so the example that I might give you was, I remember, lung cancer, and you would be like, not good if you know somebody that has lung cancer. And then the first targeted drug came out. Now the second drug. And now if I don't look up things on my computer, there's just so many different therapies now available that if you're lucky enough to have one of the ones and they catch it early, and you can treat it with one of these, lung cancer could be like, yeah, okay, but I survived.
Yeah, amazing.
So I always tell people when they have, some form of cancer, I beg them, go have it sequenced. Right? Go have it sequenced, even if your doctor pushes back. Just go have it sequenced. I mean, if there is no drug, at least there isn't a drug. But if there is, there's a higher probability of that working.
Yeah, because with cancer, the earlier you start the treatment, the better the outcome. So that cuts out, as you say, some of the trial and error of testing which drug may be the most effective.
Yep. And the data is just too compelling not to follow that paradigm. Yeah. And we're getting better and better at it every day. I mean, it's not perfect, but oh my God, compared to 5 years ago, we are orders of magnitude better at it than we were back then. And now we're able to sequence somebody as we did with COVID. I mean, I think there was an article written out of Stanford where they sequenced a child in 4 hours.
That is extraordinary. And how long did it take to sequence the human genome originally?
Oh, long time.
Yeah. It was years, wasn't it? And now you're saying
years.
4 hours.
It was years.
So do you think sequencing a cancer tumour will be in the future standard protocol for treatment?
Yeah, my personal opinion, it should be standard protocol now.
Yeah.
Although I think there would be some physicians out there that would want to lynch me by saying that, but I think it should be standard protocol now. I think the cost, they're shooting for a cost down to $60.
Goodness me. And if you think of it, that ultimately would save a lot of money, because you'd go straight to the correct treatment. You wouldn't be wasting time with other drugs and appointments you don't need in between.
Correct. But you can see how IT has to play a role here, right? So you sequence, there's a lot of information that's got to be processed.
Yeah.
Then you've got to say, okay, here's the right drug that it aligns with, right? I mean, all of this has got to be looked over by the physician, and then you've got to give it to someone. But that's what I would consider truly modern medicine, rather than, we're going to start you off on this first because that's my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so interesting. And that's where I said earlier that a computer's not biased, which of course was not entirely correct. But in this case, what you're taking out of the equation is the physician's personal experience. Like, they may not have been exposed to certain drugs, but this time, if you're using AI, it's pinpointing, it's using all the information out there to pinpoint the best treatment protocol. That's how I understand it.
I mean, I still want the physician, an experienced oncologist involved. But I also have seen situations where, the data said, give somebody this drug, it seems to be working fine, and then they switch medications and things don't go so fine. So, it's really hard. Like when I'm running businesses, if I don't look at the P&L, right, the profit and loss, and if I'm not looking at that data, I'm going to make the wrong decision. So the data helps drive like what I need to do next.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's a tool.
Yeah. No, it's one of those situations where I think the data needs to drive things as well as the physician's experience, but they can't see the molecular level of what's happening in that tumor.
So earlier you mentioned COVID-19, and I think that's a really good way of illustrating the positive application of AI. So from reading your book, it's very clear that AI played a critical role in helping researchers understand the new virus. So the genome was sequenced in a matter of days, as opposed to the years it took to first sequence the human genome. And this led to the sequence of the virus enabled scientists to develop a test that would detect the virus. It helped scientists discover the drug molecules that could potentially kill the virus. I think one of them is remdesivir. And it also played a critical role in manufacturing vaccines. That was really interesting for me to read, and it's important to understand because for the public or the layperson, it seemed like the vaccines were developed really quickly. And that led to a little bit of fear in the community because people thought, oh, perhaps that corners had been cut. But that's not actually true when you understand the role that AI played in developing the vaccine. So could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when you think about, when we did something like, if you remember SARS, when we sequenced SARS, it took us about 3 months. Once we had gotten to COVID, we sequenced that in about 48 hours.
Wow.
All right. And then because of the RNA vaccines and RNA itself, right, the way that we put it to work is it's very programmable. And so we had the first vaccines to try within 48 hours after that. So you're talking about in 4 days, we went from sequence to potential drug or potential therapy, right? And so technology has moved forward, right? Whereas people's historically are looking at history. The other thing that the governments did, which was huge, is normally what you do is you prove the drug works and then you start manufacturing it, right? And those cause delays.
Yeah, of course.
What happened was they were taking a educated guess saying, this looks like it's going to work based on the data. Let's manufacture while we're testing.
That is
and they just took a gamble, right? Because if they were wrong, you've got to throw all that stuff out.
Yeah.
Right. So, but they were right. Thank God for everybody. But all those things took a process that would take years because everything is done one after the other. And what we did is we stacked things that we could stack. And so all of a sudden, it all finished in about 9 months.
Yeah, that is extraordinary, isn't it? And so the use of AI or data really helped in this situation. It cut out months or years of trial and error, which may have been used in developing previous vaccines.
Oh, yes. And the technology that they used, being the mRNA, also lent itself to this ability to be produced very quickly, right? And make changes in it very quickly. So it was a combination of all of these that came together that let us get there. But you can just see, like, if we actually had sequencing systems set up to do surveillance around the world, you'd start to see this stuff much sooner, much faster, right? Where we can get ahead of the next pandemic as opposed to be behind it.
So that's actually my next question. Do you think that ultimately, with the use of AI, we can prevent future pandemics?
I don't think we can stop them from emerging, but we can get ahead of them, or be able to respond in real time to what's happening. This whole concept of don't test, I'm like, wait, how can you, if you don't test, you don't know where the fire is. If you don't know where the fire is, you don't know where to send the fire trucks, right? You need to understand what's going on. And these surveillance systems, think of it like radar, right? It's letting you know when something is on its way, and you can prep for it.
Yeah.
If you don't prep for it, then you're going to take the worst of it.
There's still a human element in that, though, in that to predict or see what's coming in the future in terms of potential pandemics, there does need to be collaboration and data sharing between governments and that kind of thing. Is that a fair comment, do you think?
Yes. And as a matter of fact, what I can say is during the pandemic, the amount of data that was being shared was unprecedented.
Yeah, amazing.
People were sharing data in real time because it was as if we were all fighting the war in real time.
Well, that's a positive development, given what's happening in the world at the moment. Humans can actually collaborate when we need to.
Yes. No, I think, from what I saw on, with testing drugs, clinical trials, trying to get information out, how do you manage patients? How do we make those changes? That was literally people were sharing information as easily and as quickly as they could, because we were fighting something that we didn't know how to deal with.
Yeah. It was a united effort in that sense.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's important, Harry, to address some concerns about AI that people may have. In the book, you say that AI can question what it means to be human. So from a philosophical stance, the combination of AI, technology, engineering, and the human body can blur the lines that define human versus machine. And you say, from your perspective, I understand it's an exciting question, but for some people it might sound disconcerting or even a bit terrifying. So in terms of the philosophical issues, what are the kind of questions that we need to be asking ourselves?
The way that I look at the implementation of AI, and I always try to stay on the positive side of it, because you can go down the dark hole.
Sure.
But it really is sort of, I think, for healthcare, it's democratizing care. It's raising the standard of care that someone can get. You can imagine if something has seen every image, right? You're not going to get better than that plus the physician, right? Or making the technology portable so everybody in a rural area can get access to top of the line capabilities. I look at that as like a huge bonus. These wearables, which on my hands or whatever that you're looking at, it's an Aura ring, it's an Apple Watch, and so this one is a Whoop band.
I have a Whoop as well.
Yeah, there you go. Right, and these are early warning or dashboards for yourself. And so I'm constantly learning about things about myself as I get older, and learning how to course correct to keep myself in the best shape that I can. And so it's not just a health and wellness, but the data actually influences how I do my own A/B testing and optimize, for the best outcome.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping what that means is I'm just either not going to get sick, or I'm going to push that off for as long as possible. And if you look at it that way, that means I'm not taxing the system.
Yeah.
I'm living a full and healthy, happy life, because if I'm healthy, theoretically, I should be happy. And then I optimize, like when I work, I'm sort of at my optimal level to function that way. And I think everybody wants to be healthy, happy, productive. That's where I see the benefits of these technologies, at least in the world of healthcare.
Yes.
There's a lot of dubious. I can't say that I'm a huge fan of something like Facebook or these sorts of things. I have, there's people don't understand like how dangerous those things can be. But in the world of healthcare, I think good will outweigh the bad in many areas in people's daily lives.
Yes. I want to throw in a bit of a thorny question, an ethical question.
Yep.
Surrounding genetics. So if a parent can edit genes for a rare disease in their unborn child, most people would say that's a good outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But that also means they could potentially edit other genes, for example, eye colour, for creative talent, and produce, in quotes, a designer baby. So where do we draw the line with this kind of thing?
Well, there are guidelines that are being putting out saying, you shouldn't do certain things, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
right? But in reality, some of these rare diseases we're talking about, it's like a single change that we're making. Yep. And so that single changes, we can make those happen. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about intelligence or one of these other things, it's such a complicated set of switches and buttons, and that
it's not just one gene, is it?
It's not just one gene, right? So I don't think anybody really that is, at least I can't see it being in the realm of reality at the moment. But I always tell policymakers, you have to be ahead of the curve on this, not behind the curve.
Sure.
Being behind the curve on this is Pandora's box, and you'll never close it. You have to be ahead of artificial intelligence and gene editing and these sorts of things.
Can people, or don't even know the right words to ask the question, but can you select the sex of your unborn child?
Oh, you can do that now. You don't need gene editing. There's
okay. That shows my lack of understanding. But what about that? I mean, surely, I don't know, that just seems kind of a bit wrong to me. I don't even know why, but it feels wrong.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, if you look through time, different cultures, different populations have been doing it.
Yeah.
For many, many years.
I suppose it's better
they either do it the old-fashioned way, right? Or the more modern way. But this has been an age-old.
Yeah, that's a good point. Of course, it leads to imbalances in society where you have an excess of one sex over the other, and then there's a problem. But anyway, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole right now. What about another concern that people may have is, what about data privacy, data security, the potential disaster of hacking these systems? So how should risks like this be managed, and who should take that on?
So, people should, have a healthy level of concern. I mean, you should be as concerned about this data as you are your financial data. Mm-hmm. And your expectation should be that the, institutions or companies that are working on this will be held to the same level of security as your dollars and cents.
Yes.
Biological data or health data is becoming just as important as your financial data. So you want it to be safe. But I am seeing the companies come up that are coming up with tools and technologies to ensure safety, encryption technology, and so forth. Right. So I feel good about where it's going. It's good. Just, we all want it to get there tomorrow. Yeah. So I do believe people should be concerned. But I will tell you, compared to what people share on Facebook, I would be even more concerned about what people do there, and they're just sort of not paying attention to what they're doing.
We're just voluntarily giving up so much personal information without paying a lot of attention to it. So I think that's something that people need to be more aware of in general.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's probably an example of where the regulation has not been ahead of the curve. It's almost like we're scrambling to catch up now that we understand what's going on.
Yes, you don't want to be behind the curve on this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely you don't. Well, it sounds from speaking to you that we're in good hands. So that's
I hope
positive.
so. I hope
good
so.
to hear. So I'm very curious, for someone who knows so much about healthcare and its future promise and its potential limitations, what particular steps do you take, Harry, to look after your own health?
I'm always testing all these new devices, talking to my doctor about, the implications of the results, learning from the data and trying to adjust my behavior. I don't want to restrict myself. I mean, if I want to have that glass of wine at 10 o'clock, I'll have it, but I will have it knowing that it's going to wipe out my deep sleep.
Absolutely.
Right. And, there are times where I'm like, oh no, I got something to do tomorrow. I cannot afford that wipeout of deep sleep because I know the data will support my decision. And so I just won't have the glass of wine, right? Or I won't have the meal late. But all it does is now I can make an informed decision as opposed to whatever happens.
Yes. I think my Whoop band, which is something you're wearing as well, the main impact that's had for me is on my sleep, because it's confirmed what I already suspected. For example, you drink wine, you don't sleep as well. You sort of know that. But when you actually see it reflected back to you in the data, it's really interesting, and it does give you pause. Like you think, okay, as you mentioned, maybe I won't drink that glass of wine tonight because tomorrow I'm going for a long run or whatever it might be. So I love looking at all that data. I find it so fascinating.
Yeah, and the beauty of AI is it's supposed to make it easy for someone to put that information to work for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing technology, isn't it? I mean, in the past, to measure your heart rate, you needed to wear a cumbersome strap around your chest that was really uncomfortable, and now you just have something sitting on your wrist. It's incredible.
Yes.
So in the book, you pose the question, if a computer algorithm could predict that you are going to die, or from what, would you want to know? And assuming there's no accident that intervenes, would you want to know?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've got 2 boys, and, I just want to, if I could prepare, I want to prepare in some way to make sure that I'm leaving everything so that, they're okay.
Good order.
Them and my wife are okay. I'm sure that if I ever did know, it's going to freak me out for a while, but it is, you just gotta, information is knowledge, and knowledge is power.
Yes.
So some people want to know, and then some people absolutely don't want to know. So it's your preference.
Don't want to know camp for sure. I think if I knew, it would play on my mind so much that I wouldn't relax and enjoy the moment. I'd feel like every moment was high pressure. So I definitely wouldn't want to know. But even if you can predict it, you still don't really know, because AI could never predict whether you step in front of a bus and get knocked over. And
no, but it's getting really good at saying who in the critical care department is migrating towards crashing.
Right. See, that's a very helpful use of AI, isn't it? Because then the resources can be directed at the right moment to the right person.
Yep.
So, Harry, the final question I like to ask all my guests is if you could recommend 2 things that people could do to improve their well-being, and it could be anything at all, what would they be?
So a wireless scale, because we know that weight plays a huge role in many different health conditions. And you can see the line going up or down. It's pretty straightforward. Maybe a blood pressure cuff, right? Because you can't see that. And if you're not measuring it every once in a while, it can sneak up on you and wreak havoc on your life. If I threw in a third, I would say some sort of, exercise monitor that can look at your heart and your sleep and these other categories. But I always tell people, pick one and incorporate it into your life.
Yeah.
Get used to it. And then if you want to add more after that.
Yeah. Of all the wearables you're wearing 3 things I can see at the moment. What's your favorite?
Probably my Apple Watch and then my Whoop band. My Whoop band is more like a coach. And then my Apple Watch acts like a aggregator of all the, the data that comes into my phone.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you spend much time looking at it?
My watch, no. The phone, yes. Because the phone will feed the...
Yes.
the watch will feed the phone and then I can see it easier on the screen.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting, isn't it? Harry, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us today. And if people want to follow you or find out what you're doing or buy your book, what's the best place for them to do that?
So the book is available on Amazon. They can just look up The Future You and Glorikian, or just go to my website, which is www.glorikian.com. So it's glorikian.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And that was really interesting to learn about the application of AI. And you have allayed some of my fears, I have to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Harry Glorikian, healthcare entrepreneur, expert in the application of AI in healthcare, and author of the book, The Future You, How Artificial Intelligence Can Help You Get Healthier, Stress Less, and Live Longer. So thank you for listening today, and I hope you found my discussion with Harry as enlightening as I did. And if you enjoy Vibrant Lives podcast, please share the podcast and tell your friends about it. And if you could take a minute to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts, it will help people find my podcast, and I'm always so grateful for that. You can subscribe to my podcast on all good podcast providers like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Overcast, and Google Podcasts. And you can also subscribe on YouTube. Also, please check out my website at vibrantlivespodcast.com, and there you'll find a library of all my previous podcast episodes and reviews of books that I recommend and more. So please, if you want to contact me, please do so via the contacts page on my website or DM me and let me know if there's a person you'd like me to interview, and I will do my very best to deliver that to you. I've got some excellent and informative episodes coming up for you, including my interview with Dr. Emma Ryan, dermatologist, where we discuss teenage skin and in particular acne and how that can impact mood, plus of course what can be done about it. We also talk about mature skin. Vibrant Lives podcast is recorded on ancient Kaurna land. I acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of this land and pay respect to their elders past, present and future. Thank you very much for tuning in. Eat well, move well, think well.